My name isn't important. What's important is that you know I'm from eastern Kentucky, born and raised. I'm not some city transplant who gets spooked by an owl hooting in the dark. I grew up in these hills. My dad grew up in them, and his dad before him. Our family has been on the same piece of land since the government first started handing out deeds. The woods behind our house were my playground. I knew the name of every tree, every bird call, every twist and turn of the creek that cut through the bottom of the holler. I'm telling you this so you understand. I'm not prone to flights of fancy. I don't believe in ghosts, and I always figured things like Bigfoot or Dogman were just stories people told around a campfire to scare each other. Just old mountain folklore, nothing more. I was 20 years old when it happened. It was a Tuesday night in late October. The leaves had all turned and mostly fallen, leaving the trees looking like skeletons against the gray sky. There was a chill in the air that promised the first real frost was on its way. I was working for a logging crew back then, running a skidder. It was hard work, long hours, but it was honest money, and I was good at it. I was strong, I was young, and I felt like I had the world by the tail. That day had been like any other. We'd been clearing a section of land over on the next ridge, about a 45-minute drive from my house. The day ended, I said my goodbyes to the crew, and I climbed into my truck. It was a 1998 Ford Ranger, blue, with a silver stripe down the side. It was rusted out in the wheel wells, and the driver's side door had to be slammed just right to latch. But that truck was my pride and joy. It was the first thing I ever bought with my own money. It could get me anywhere I needed to go, up and down these steep, winding roads that most people wouldn't even call roads. The drive home was routine. I'd done it 1,000 times. The first 10 minutes were on paved county road. Then you turned onto a smaller blacktop that wound its way up the mountain for another 15. The last 20 minutes were on a gravel road that the county only bothered to grade twice a year. It was that last stretch, that familiar, bumpy, isolated road, where my world turned upside down. I had the radio on, listening to some country station out of hazard. The sun had already dipped below the western ridge, and the world was bathed in that deep, bruised purple light of dusk, the kind of light that makes shadows grow long and swallow up the details of the landscape. My headlights cut a weak yellow path through the growing dark. I remember I was thinking about what Mom was making for supper, probably pinto beans and cornbread, a Tuesday staple. I was tired. My muscles ached from a long day of wrestling with logs and machinery. My mind was on a hot meal and a soft bed. The road I was on, we just called it Ridge Road. It followed the spine of the mountain for about 5 miles before it dipped back down into our holler. There were maybe 3 other houses on that whole stretch, and they were set way back in the trees, hidden from view. You could drive the whole length of it and not see another soul. That was normal. That was just life out here. The quiet, the isolation. That was part of the appeal. It always felt safe to me. Safer than any city. As I made the turn onto the gravel, the truck bounced and rattled. The sound of the rocks pinging against the undercarriage, a familiar rhythm. The woods pressed in close on both sides of the road. Tall oaks and poplars, their bare branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. In the summer, it was a green tunnel. In the fall, It was a tunnel of bone. I was about halfway down Ridge Road, maybe 2 miles from my driveway, when the first thing happened. It was subtle. So subtle I almost didn't notice it. The radio started to crackle. The country song I was listening to dissolved into a hiss of static. I fiddled with the knob, trying to get the station back, but it was no use. Just static. I figured I was just in a dead spot. It happened sometimes, up on the ridge. I turned the radio off, and that's when I heard it. The silence. It wasn't just the absence of the radio. It was everything. The constant hum of the woods at night, the crickets, the katydids, the frogs down in the damp spots. It was all gone. It was a dead, flat, absolute silence that I had never experienced before in my life. It was like someone had thrown a thick, heavy blanket over the entire forest. The only sound was the crunch of my tires on the gravel and the low rumble of my truck's engine. A cold prickle went up the back of my neck. I've been a hunter since I was old enough to hold a rifle. I know what that kind of silence means. It means a predator is near, a big one, something that makes every smaller creature hold its breath and pray it isn't found. My first thought was a coyote, or maybe a bobcat. We had black bears too, more and more of them every year. A bear would definitely shut the woods up. I slowed the truck down a little, my eyes scanning the tree line at the edge of my headlights. I wasn't scared, not yet, just alert. My senses were on high. I rolled my window down a little, listening. Nothing, not a single sound, just the engine. The air that came in was cold and damp, and it carried a smell with it. It was a strange smell. It wasn't the normal scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was heavy, musky, like a wet dog that had rolled in something dead. But it was stronger than that, more rank. There was a coppery, metallic tang to it too, like old blood. It was a foul, gag-inducing odor that seemed to coat the inside of my mouth. I wrinkled my nose and rolled the window back up. Dead deer, I muttered to myself. It was the only logical explanation. A deer had probably gotten hit on the road and dragged itself into the woods to die. A bear or coyotes had found it. That would explain the silence and the smell. Case closed. I felt a little better, having a rational explanation. My mind settled, and I pressed a little harder on the gas, eager to get home. I passed the old Miller place, a collapsed house, and a falling-down barn that had been abandoned for 50 years. The woods had all but reclaimed it. My headlights swept across the sagging porch and the dark, empty windows that looked like vacant eyes. It was a local landmark, the halfway point. I knew I was only about a mile from home now. Section, I came around a sharp bend in the road, one that I always took slow because it was a blind curve with a steep drop-off on the right side. My headlights swung left, illuminating the dense wall of trees. And that's when I saw it. It was standing just off the road, on the left side, maybe 30 yards ahead of me. At first, my brain didn't know what to make of it. It was just a shape, a tall, dark silhouette against the darker woods. My first thought was that it was a person. Maybe someone's car had broken down and they were walking for help, but that didn't feel right. It was too tall, way too tall. I slowed the truck to a crawl, my heart starting to beat a little faster. As I got closer, the shape resolved itself into more detail under the glow of my headlights. It was not a person, And it was not a bear. It was standing on two legs. They were long and muscular, bent backwards at the knee like a dog's. It was covered in dark matted fur, the color of charcoal and mud. It was massive. The shoulders were incredibly broad, wider than any man I'd ever seen. The arms were long, powerfully built, and they hung down at its sides, ending in what looked like large clawed hands. But the head, that was the thing that broke my mind. It was the head of a wolf, a huge predatory canine head. It had a long snout, and I could see the glint of teeth even from that distance, and on top of its head were two pointed, alert ears cocked forward in my direction. It was just standing there, perfectly still, watching me. It had to be at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It towered over the saplings around it. My mind was screaming. It was a frantic, panicked slideshow of possibilities, each one more impossible than the last. A man in a suit? No, not out here, not in the middle of nowhere. It moved with a subtle weight and presence that was too real. An animal? No animal on earth looked like that. A bear standing on its hind legs? Absolutely not. I've seen dozens of bears. Their shape is completely different. They're bulky, pear-shaped. This thing was lean, muscular, and proportioned like a nightmare version of a man crossed with a wolf. I stopped the truck completely. We were maybe 50 feet apart now. My high beams were on it, and it didn't even flinch. It just stood there, staring, and in the bright light, I could see its eyes. They were glowing, a faint yellowish green like a cat's eyes, but they weren't reflecting the light. They seemed to be producing their own faint luminescence. They were fixed on me, and in them I saw something that terrified me more than its size, or its claws, or its fangs. I saw intelligence. It wasn't the simple, instinct-driven look of an animal. It was a cold, calculating, aware gaze. It knew what I was. It knew I was in a metal box. It was looking at me, and it was thinking. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. It was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. The world had shrunk to just me, my truck, and this impossible creature standing on the road. The silence was still absolute. My own breathing was deafening in the cab of the truck. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I was paralyzed by a fear so pure and so profound that it was like ice water in my veins. Then it moved. It took one slow, deliberate step out onto the gravel road, into the full glare of my headlights. It moved with a fluid grace that was terrifying for something so large. It didn't shamble or lumber. It walked like a hunter. As it stepped forward, it turned its head slightly, giving me a better look at its profile, the long snout, the powerful jawline. I could see the muscles ripple under its dark fur. It was real. This wasn't a dream or a hallucination. This thing was real, and it was right in front of me. That single step broke the spell. My survival instinct kicked in, a raw, primal scream in the back of my head that just said, "Go." My foot slammed down on the accelerator. The engine roared to life, and the back tires spun on the loose gravel, kicking up a shower of rocks. The truck lurched forward. I aimed the truck to the right, to get around it. I wasn't trying to hit it. I just wanted to get past it, to get away. The creature reacted instantly. The moment my engine roared, it dropped. Not down on all fours, but into a low sprinter's crouch, and then it launched itself forward, not at my truck, but alongside it. It was running, on two legs. I was flooring it. The speedometer was climbing 20, 30, 35 miles per hour. That's fast on a narrow gravel road with a drop-off on one side. The truck was rattling and shaking, and I was fighting to keep it straight. And this thing was right outside my driver's side window, keeping pace with me effortlessly. I risked a glance to my left. It was there, a dark blur of motion. Its long legs were eating up the ground in huge, powerful strides. Its arms were pumping, just like a human runner's. Its head was low, its glowing eyes fixed on me through the window. I could hear its claws scraping and clicking on the gravel, a sound that cut right through the roar of my engine. It was so close I could have reached out and touched it. Panic gave way to pure, abject terror. I was going to die. This thing was going to pull me out of my truck and tear me to pieces on the side of the road. I swerved the truck to the left, trying to hit it, trying to force it away. It dodged back into the trees without breaking stride, moving through the underbrush like it wasn't even there. Then it was back on the road, right beside me again. It was toying with me. It could have ended it at any point. It could have jumped on the hood. It could have smashed through the window. But it didn't. It just ran alongside me, watching me, letting me know that I couldn't escape. Then it did something that still gives me nightmares. It opened its mouth and a sound came out. It wasn't a growl or a bark. It was a deep guttural sound that was somewhere between a roar and a human scream. It was a sound of pure rage and malice, and it vibrated through the metal of the truck, through the seat, and into my bones. My driveway was just ahead. I saw the two reflectors on the posts that marked the entrance. It was my only chance. I didn't slow down. I cranked the steering wheel hard to the right. The truck slid, fishtailing wildly as it left the gravel road and shot up my driveway. I bounced hard over a rut, my head hitting the roof. For a second, I thought I was going to lose control and wrap the truck around the big oak tree in our front yard. But somehow I held on. I stomped on the brakes, and the truck skidded to a halt sideways in the yard, not 20 feet from my front porch. The headlights were pointing directly at the side of the house. I didn't wait. I didn't turn the engine off. I didn't even close the door. I scrambled out of the truck and ran for the porch steps. My legs felt like rubber. I fumbled with the keys in my pocket, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. I could hear it. It had stopped at the edge of the woods, at the end of our driveway. I could hear its heavy, raspy breathing. A low growl rumbled in the darkness. I finally got the door open, stumbled inside, and slammed it shut behind me. I threw the deadbolt. I ran to the living room window and peered out through the curtains. The truck was still running, its headlights cutting a swath of light across the yard. The driver's side door was hanging open. At the edge of the light, where the driveway met the dark woods, I saw it. It was standing there again, just outside the range of the light, a tall, dark shape. I could see the outline of its wolf-like head and its broad shoulders. And I could see its eyes, two faint, glowing embers in the blackness, watching the house, watching me. We stared at each other for a moment. Then it turned its head, as if listening to something in the woods behind it. It took one step back, melting into the shadows, and then it was gone. I stayed at that window for a long time, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't move until I heard my dad's truck coming down the road. He worked second shift at the mine and usually got home around midnight. The sound of his engine was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. When he pulled into the yard, he stopped and got out, looking at my truck parked sideways, with the door open and the engine running. He came inside, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. "What in the world is going on, son? You trying to tear up the yard?" I tried to tell him. I was a mess. I was shaking, crying, barely able to get the words out. I told him about the thing on the road, the chase, the glowing eyes. I told him everything. He listened patiently. He put a hand on my shoulder. When I was finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he sighed and said, "You're tired, Clay. You've been working too hard. You probably saw a bear, and it spooked you." "It wasn't a bear, Dad," I insisted. "It ran next to the truck. On two legs, it had a wolf's head." "Okay, son, okay," he said, in that placating tone you use with someone who's hysterical. "Let's just get some sleep. Things will look better in the morning." He wouldn't believe me. He didn't want to believe me. To him, the world was a simple place. There are deer, there are bears, and there are people. There was no room in his world for what I saw. I went to my room, but I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair by my window, staring out into the darkness, listening to every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves. The safety I had felt my entire life in that house, on that land, was gone. It had been ripped away from me in a matter of minutes. The next morning, my dad went out to look around. He was trying to humor me. He came back inside an hour later. "Well, I walked the road," he said. "Didn't see anything. No tracks, no blood, nothing." "The ground is too hard. It's all rock and gravel," I said. "Look, Clay," he said, his voice firm. "You saw a bear. Your mind played tricks on you. It happens. Now, I don't want to hear any more about this monster nonsense. You'll scare your mother." And that was it. The conversation was over. I was alone with it. The disbelief from my own father was almost as terrifying as the creature itself. It made me feel crazy. It made me question what I had seen, even though every fiber of my being screamed that it was real. Life, on the surface, went back to normal. But for me, nothing was ever the same. I quit the logging job a week later. I couldn't stand being out in the woods anymore. I got a job at a garage in town, working on cars. It was indoors, under bright fluorescent lights. I felt safer there. I never drove Ridge Road again after dark. If I had to be out late, I would take the long way home, an extra 30 minutes on paved roads through town. My dad gave me grief about it, said I was wasting gas, but he didn't push it. I think, on some level, he knew something had really happened to me out there. He just couldn't bring himself to admit it. The fear became a part of me. It was a low, constant hum in the back of my mind. I became hyper-vigilant. I checked the locks on the doors and windows every night before I went to bed. I bought a shotgun and kept it loaded by my bed. I couldn't stand to be outside after the sun went down. The woods that had been my sanctuary were now a place of unimaginable terror. Every shadow held a monster. Every sound in the night was it, coming back for me. I started having nightmares, horrible, vivid nightmares, where I was running through the woods, the sound of its claws on the gravel right behind me. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, the sound of its inhuman roar echoing in my ears. I tried to talk to my friends about it once. We were sitting around a bonfire, drinking a few beers. I thought maybe they would be more open-minded than my dad. I was wrong. They laughed at me. They called me crazy. They made jokes about werewolves. After that, I never told another soul. I learned to keep it inside, locked away where no one could mock it. But it ate at me. The isolation was a heavy weight. Years passed. I got married, had kids of my own. We moved away from the holler to a small subdivision closer to town. My wife knows something happened to me back then, something that changed me, but she doesn't know the details. I can't bring myself to tell her. How do you tell the person you love that you saw something that shouldn't exist? How do you explain the fear that still grips you 2 decades later? My dad passed away a few years ago. We never spoke of it again. But after the funeral, I was going through some of his things in his workshop, and I found an old, yellowed newspaper clipping tucked away in a drawer. It was from the local paper, dated from the 1960s. The headline read, "Local Man Reports Terrifying Wolfman on Ridge Road." My blood ran cold. I read the article. It told the story of a coal miner who was driving home late one night on the very same stretch of road. He claimed a huge, hairy, bipedal creature with the head of a wolf had chased his car. The article treated it as a joke, a piece of local color, but it described what I had seen almost exactly: the height, the speed, the canine head. My dad had kept that clipping for over 50 years. He knew. He must have known there were other stories. He just couldn't face it. He chose to live in a world where things like that didn't happen. I don't know if I can blame him. It's an easier world to live in. I'm telling this story now because I'm tired of carrying it alone. I'm not trying to convince anyone. If you don't believe me, that's fine. I wouldn't have believed me either before that night. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was something else, something ancient and predatory that lives in the deep, dark places of the world. I want to warn people. If you're ever out in the woods on some remote, lonely road late at night, and the world suddenly goes silent, turn around, go back. Don't wait to see what's out there in the dark. Just go, because some things are not meant to be seen, and once you see them, you can never unsee them. You carry the image of those glowing, intelligent eyes with you for the rest of your life. You carry the memory of that sound, a roar that promises a violent, terrible end. The world becomes a bigger, scarier place, and you are never, ever truly safe again. I still think about it every single day. The memory is as fresh and as terrifying as it was that night. I can still feel the vibration of the engine, the tightness in my chest, the cold dread that washed over me when I saw it. I can still see it in my mind's eye, running alongside my truck, its powerful legs churning, its wolf-like head turned towards me, its eyes burning in the darkness. It's a brand on my soul. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I think I can smell it. That same foul, wet dog and old blood scent. It's probably just my mind playing tricks on me, but I still go inside and lock the doors. I've learned that the world is not the safe, predictable place I once thought it was. There are things out there, in the shadows, that defy all explanation. and all we can do is hope that our paths never cross theirs. Because if they do, you will be changed forever. You will know what true fear is, and you will spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. The psychological toll has been immense. For years, I struggled with anxiety and a low-grade paranoia that I just couldn't shake. Any sudden noise would make me jump. The sound of a dog barking aggressively in the distance would send a chill down my spine. I found myself scanning the tree line whenever I was outside, even in broad daylight in my own yard. It was exhausting, living with that constant level of heightened awareness. My relationships suffered. It's hard to connect with people when you're carrying a secret that's so fundamental to who you've become. You feel like you're living on a different planet. They're worried about mortgages and office politics, and you're haunted by the memory of an 8-foot tall bipedal canine. There's a disconnect. You can't share the heaviest part of your soul, so you hold back a piece of yourself from everyone. I did go through a period where I became obsessed. I spent countless hours online, late at night when my family was asleep. I scoured forums and websites, reading other people's stories. I found hundreds of them from all over the country, all over the world. People describing the same creature, the same details. The dog-like legs, the pointed ears, the incredible speed, the intelligent eyes. Finding those stories was both a comfort and a curse. It was a comfort to know I wasn't crazy, that other people had seen it too. But it was a curse because it confirmed the reality of it. It wasn't a one-off hallucination. It was a species, a real, living thing that was out there, hunting, existing just on the edge of our world. I learned the name people had for it, the Dogman. I read about the different theories, that it's some kind of undiscovered primate, a relic from another era, that it's a supernatural entity, a demon or a shapeshifter from old legends. Some people even think it's some kind of government experiment gone wrong. I don't know what it is, and honestly, I don't care. Knowing what to call it doesn't make it any less terrifying. A label doesn't change the fact that it's a monster. The encounter forced me to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about the world. I was raised in a religious household, but my faith was more of a cultural thing than a deep personal belief. After that night, I started thinking more about good and evil, about light and darkness. When you come face to face with something that seems to be the literal embodiment of predatory malice, it makes you wonder about the other side of the coin. If something that evil can exist, then maybe something truly good has to exist as well, just to keep the balance. It's a thought that has brought me a small measure of comfort over the years. I've had to make peace with the fact that there are questions that have no answers. What was it? Why was it there? Why did it let me go? I will never know. Maybe it was just curious. Maybe it was marking its territory. Or maybe, and this is the thought that still chills me to the bone, maybe it was just playing with its food, the way a cat will toy with a mouse before the final kill. Maybe it got what it wanted from me, my fear. My kids are teenagers now. They love to go camping and hiking, just like I did when I was their age. It's a constant source of anxiety for me. I try not to let my fear infect them. I don't want them to be afraid of the world, but I can't help but be overprotective. I make sure they have the best gear. I make sure they always go in a group. I make them check in with me constantly. I've taught them more about situational awareness and survival skills than my dad ever taught me. They think I'm just an overbearing dad. They don't understand that I'm trying to prepare them for a world that's far more dangerous than they can possibly imagine. One evening, a few years back, my son came home from a camping trip with his friends. He was quiet, subdued. He told me they had been sitting around the campfire when the woods suddenly went completely silent. He said it was the weirdest, most unsettling feeling. He said they all got spooked and decided to pack up and come home early. I just looked at him, my heart in my throat. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to grab him and tell him to never, ever go into those woods again, but I didn't. I just nodded and said, "Good call. Always trust your gut." I didn't want to burden him with my monster. But that night, I didn't sleep at all. The thought of that thing getting anywhere near my son, it's a fear worse than my own death. The house I grew up in is empty now. After my mom passed, my sister and I sold the property. I couldn't bring myself to live there. The memories were too strong. The new owners are a young couple from the city who wanted to escape to the country. They talk about renovating the old place, clearing some land, starting a small farm. I wish them well, but I pray they never have to learn what really lives in those woods. I pray they never have their peaceful country dream turn into a nightmare. I suppose, in a way, I'm grateful for the experience. It taught me a hard lesson, but a valuable one. It taught me humility. I was a young man who thought he knew everything about the world, who thought he was the king of his little corner of the woods. That night taught me that we are not at the top of the food chain. It taught me that there are mysteries in this world far beyond our comprehension, and it taught me to respect the unknown. So, that's my story. It's the truth, every word of it. I don't expect you to believe it, but if you're ever out there in the quiet, lonely places, and you feel that prickle on the back of your neck, and the world goes dead silent around you, listen to that feeling. It's an ancient instinct, a warning from a part of your brain that still remembers when we were the prey, not the predator. Don't ignore it. Get in your car, lock your doors, and drive away. And don't look back. Just get back to the light. Because what's in the darkness is not your friend. It is not a story. It is real. And it is waiting. The aftermath didn't just affect my nights. It seeped into every corner of my daytime life as well. At the garage, I found myself constantly looking out the big bay doors, my eyes drawn to the line of trees that bordered the back of the property. My coworkers noticed my jumpiness. They'd come up behind me, and I'd flinch. They'd drop a wrench, and I'd spin around, my heart pounding, my body tensed for a threat that wasn't there. They made jokes about it, of course. "Clay's got a case of the nerves," they'd say. "Too much coffee." I'd force a laugh and try to play it off, but inside I was screaming. The constant state of high alert was mentally and physically draining. I was always tired, always on edge. I lost my love for the fall season. What was once my favorite time of year, with the crisp air and the beautiful colors, became a source of dread. The shorter days meant more hours of darkness. The bare trees meant there was nowhere for a person to hide, but it also felt like there was nowhere for the creatures of the night to hide either, as if they were more exposed, more present. The sight of skeletal branches against a twilight sky would trigger a visceral memory of that night, of that bone-colored tunnel of trees. I even developed a strange aversion to dogs for a while, especially large ones like German shepherds or huskies. I'd see one, even a friendly family pet, and my stomach would clench. I'd see the shape of its head, the point of its ears, and for a split second my mind would flash back to that horrific face in my headlights. I knew it was irrational. I knew this was a dog, not a monster. But the primitive part of my brain that had been so deeply traumatized couldn't tell the difference. It took me years to get comfortable around dogs again. The experience also created a profound sense of loneliness. When you go through something so traumatic and reality-altering, you have a desperate need to talk about it, to process it with someone else. But when the thing you experienced is so far outside the realm of accepted reality, you can't. You are effectively silenced. My dad's dismissal, my friend's ridicule, it taught me a harsh lesson. Keep my mouth shut. This created a chasm between me and the people I was closest to. I was carrying this enormous, terrifying secret, and it made me feel like an outsider in my own life. I would sit at family dinners or hang out with friends, listening to them talk about their normal lives and their normal problems, and I would feel a million miles away. This isolation led me down the path of research. It wasn't just about validating my own experience. It was about finding a community, even an anonymous, online one. It was a way to connect with others who had been through the same fire. I read books by cryptozoologists and paranormal investigators. I listened to podcasts where people called in to share their encounters. Every story I heard that mirrored my own was like a lifeline. It was proof that I wasn't alone and that my sanity was intact. I learned that my experience was terrifyingly common. The location, a remote, wooded road. The time, dusk or late at night. The initial signs, the woods going silent, a foul smell. The creature's appearance, a massive bipedal canine. The chase, its incredible speed and aggression. The psychological aftermath, a lifetime of fear and trauma. It was a pattern repeated over and over again in the accounts of people from all walks of life. This knowledge was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was validating. On the other, it was horrifying. The sheer number of credible reports suggested that these things weren't just rare, isolated phenomena. It suggested they were a hidden but widespread part of our world. The idea that there was a secret population of giant, predatory monsters living just beyond the tree line was a deeply unsettling concept to come to terms with. It made the world feel thin, like the veil between our safe, understood reality and a much older, darker one could be torn at any moment. I also had to deal with the nagging question of, what if? What if I hadn't been in my truck? What if I had been on foot? What if my truck had stalled? The creature was toying with me, I'm sure of it. It could have taken me at any second. The chase was a display of power, a psychological game. The fact that I survived was not due to my own skill or quick thinking. It was due to the creature's choice. It chose to let me go. This lack of agency is a terrifying thing to accept. My life was in its hands, and for some unknown reason, it spared me. I'll never know why, and that uncertainty is a ghost that will follow me forever. Over time, the raw, visceral terror has faded into a dull, chronic ache of caution and awareness. It's like living with a permanent injury. You learn to adapt. You learn to avoid the things that cause pain. You build your life around the limitations it imposes. I don't go out in the woods. I don't drive on back roads at night. I have floodlights around my house that turn the yard into daylight at the slightest motion. My family thinks I'm just being overly cautious about burglars. They don't know I'm trying to keep a much older and more dangerous darkness at bay. The discovery of that newspaper clipping in my dad's workshop was a pivotal moment for me. It recontextualized my entire relationship with him. His dismissal of my story wasn't born of disbelief, but of fear. He wasn't telling me I was crazy. He was trying to protect me and himself from a truth he couldn't handle. He knew there were stories. He had lived in those hills his whole life. He must have heard whispers, rumors, old tales passed down. My encounter brought those old tales to life, dragging them out of the realm of folklore and planting them firmly in his reality, right in his own front yard. He couldn't face it, so he locked it away, just like he locked away that newspaper clipping. Understanding that helped me to forgive him for not believing me. In his own way, he was just trying to keep the monsters in the dark, where he thought they belonged. I am sharing this now, after all these years, for a simple reason. The world is getting smaller. More and more people are moving into rural areas, building houses deeper and deeper in the woods, encroaching on territories that have been left alone for centuries. People go into the wilderness seeking peace and solitude, unprepared for what might actually be there. They think the only dangers are bears and mountain lions. They need to know that there are other things out there. Things that are not in the guidebooks. Things that are faster, stronger, and smarter than any known animal. I don't want to scare people away from nature, but I want them to go with their eyes open. I want them to understand that respect for the wilderness means acknowledging that we don't know everything about it. It means being humble. It means listening to that primal instinct that we have spent generations trying to ignore. If my story can convince just one person to turn their car around when the woods go silent, or to pack up their campsite when they get that unshakable feeling of being watched, then it will have been worth telling. Because you don't get a second chance with a creature like that. I was one of the lucky ones. I got away. I have to believe there are many others who did not. They just became another statistic, another missing person case that was never solved, their story vanishing with them into the cold, silent woods. I'm not writing this down to convince anyone of anything. I know what that sounds like. It's the first thing people say when they're about to tell you something you won't believe. But it's the truth. My goal here isn't persuasion. It's a warning, and maybe, just maybe, it's a way for me to get it all out in one place so it doesn't feel like it's just rattling around inside my own head anymore. Because it does. It rattles. Every single day. Before all this happened, my life was simple. I'm a carpenter. Or I was. I built custom furniture, cabinets, things like that. I worked for myself out of a large workshop I built on my own property. The property was the best part. It was about 15 acres, mostly wooded, tucked back in a hollow in the Appalachian Mountains. It had belonged to my grandfather. He left it to me, and I spent 5 years of my life making it my own. The house was small, just a 2-bedroom cabin he'd built in the 70s. but I'd renovated it from the studs out. It was solid. It was my home. The workshop was my pride and joy, though. It was a big pole barn, about 100 yards from the back of the house, right up against the edge of the woods. I had everything I needed in there. Table saw, planer, joiner, more hand tools than I could count. The smell of sawdust was the first thing that hit you when you opened the door. Pine and oak and cherry. To me, it was the smell of a good day's work. I loved my life there. I loved the quiet. My nearest neighbor was over a mile down the gravel road. Most nights, the only sounds were the crickets and the owls. I knew the woods like the back of my hand. I'd hunted and hiked them since I was a boy. I knew the sounds of a deer stepping on a dry leaf, the chuff of a bear rooting for grubs, the cry of a hawk circling overhead. Those woods were as familiar to me as my own living room. I never felt scared there, not once. That was my mistake. Thinking I knew the place, thinking I belonged there. The change was slow, so slow I barely noticed it at first. It started in late October. The leaves had all turned and most had fallen. The woods had that open skeletal look they get right before winter sets in. You can see for a long way through the bare trees. I was working on a big commission, a full set of kitchen cabinets, and I was putting in long hours. Often I'd be in the workshop until well after midnight. The walk from the shop to the house was one I'd made thousands of times. I had a big floodlight on the back of the house and another on the front of the shop. They lit up the grassy path between them pretty well. But beyond that light, it was a deep, profound darkness. The kind of dark you only get miles away from any city. The first strange thing was the silence. I'd finish up for the night, kill the noise of the saws and the sanders, and step outside. And there would be nothing, no crickets, no frogs from the little creek that ran along the edge of the property, no owls, just a dead, heavy quiet. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. The first couple of times it happened, I didn't think much of it. Maybe a cold front was moving in. Animals are sensitive to that stuff. But it kept happening, night after night. I'd step out of the loud, bright workshop into a world that felt like it had been muted. It was unnerving. I started leaving the big roll-up door on the shop open while I worked, just so I wouldn't have to step out into that sudden silence. But then I'd notice it while I was still working. I'd be running a board through the table saw, and when I shut it off, the silence would just rush in. It started to feel like something was out there, listening, something that made all the other creatures of the night go quiet and hide. I told myself I was just tired, working too many hours. I'm a logical person. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters. I believe in what I can see and touch. Bears, coyotes, bobcats. Those are real. And I knew what they sounded like. This was different. This was the absence of sound. Then came the smell. It would come and go. I'd be walking to the shop in the morning or taking a break on the porch, and I'd catch a whiff of it. It was awful. It smelled like a wet dog that had rolled in something dead. A heavy, greasy, musky smell. It was strong enough to make my nose wrinkle. I figured a coyote or maybe a stray dog had a den nearby. Or maybe a bear had killed a deer somewhere deep in the woods and the scent was carrying on the wind. I went looking for a carcass a couple of times. I walked the perimeter of my property, pushing through the brush. I never found a thing. but the smell would keep coming back, always when I least expected it. Sometimes it would be so strong it was like the source was right next to me, just out of sight. I started feeling watched. It's a cliché, I know, but it's the only way to describe it. A prickling on the back of my neck. A feeling that I was not alone, even when I was standing in the middle of my own yard. I'd be in the shop, sanding a piece of wood by hand, and I'd get the sudden urge to look up toward the dark tree line. I'd stare into the blackness between the trees, expecting to see a pair of eyes looking back. I never did, but the feeling didn't go away. It got worse. I started locking the doors to the house during the day, which was something I'd never done in my life. I bought heavier curtains for the windows. At night, walking from the shop to the house, I started to run. I'd shut everything down, kill the lights, and just sprint across that 100 yards of grass, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt foolish. A grown man scared of the dark on his own property. I was jumpy. A branch falling in the woods would make me flinch. I was losing sleep. I'd lie in bed and listen to the silence outside, and my mind would play tricks on me. I'd hear what sounded like footsteps on the gravel driveway, only to look out the window and see nothing. My brother, Mark, came to visit one Saturday. He lived a couple of hours away, in the city. He thought my life in the woods was idyllic. We were sitting on the porch, and he asked me if I was okay. He said I looked tired, worn out. I tried to explain it to him. The silence, the smell, the feeling of being watched. He laughed. Not a mean laugh, just a dismissive one. "You've been out here by yourself too long, man," he said. "It's just country stuff. A big old buck watching you from the woods. A dead groundhog under your porch." He told me I needed to get out more, go into town, meet some people. He didn't get it. How could he? This was a feeling, a creeping dread that had settled over my home. It wasn't loneliness. It was a feeling of being hunted. The night it happened was a Tuesday in early November. It was cold, with a sharp wind that rattled the last of the dead leaves on the oak trees. I had to finish the last of the cabinet doors. The client was picking them up the next morning. I was in the shop until almost 2 in the morning, spraying the final coat of lacquer. The smell of the lacquer was strong, so I had the big roll-up door open about halfway to ventilate the space. My air compressor would kick on and off, a loud, jarring noise that always made me jump a little. I finished the last door, cleaned my spray gun, and shut off the compressor, and the silence that rushed in was the deepest, most absolute silence I had ever heard. It was so complete, it felt like a pressure in my ears. My own breathing sounded like a bellows. I stood there for a long moment, just listening to the nothing. The wind had died down completely. Not a single leaf rustled. Then I smelled it. That foul, dead dog, greasy smell. It was stronger than it had ever been before. It wasn't a faint whiff on the breeze. It was thick and heavy, and it was right outside the shop. My heart started to pound. A cold, sharp spike of adrenaline shot through me. I told myself it was a bear. It had to be a bear, attracted by the smell of the trash I'd forgotten to take to the dump. But I knew, deep down, in a place that doesn't use logic, I knew it wasn't a bear. I slowly walked over to the workbench and picked up my biggest maglite. It was a heavy 4-cell beast that could double as a club. My hand was shaking as I flicked it on. I kept the beam pointed at the floor. I didn't want to look outside. I just stood there, my ears straining, my eyes fixed on the concrete floor. I heard a sound, a soft crunch, like a heavy foot stepping on dry leaves and gravel just beyond the open door. Then another crunch. It was slow, deliberate. Whatever was out there was walking, not scrambling on all fours. It was heavy. I could feel a faint vibration through the soles of my boots. This was not a bear. A bear shuffles. It snorts. This was a steady, bipedal footstep. My mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation. A person? A trespasser? Out here? At 2 in the morning? It didn't make sense. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Who's out there?" I called out. My voice sounded thin, shaky. It was swallowed by the silence. No answer, just the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. Then I heard another sound, a low, guttural noise. It was a growl, but not like any dog or bear I'd ever heard. It was deeper. It vibrated in my chest, a resonant, menacing rumble. It was the sound of a predator, a very large predator, and it was close, right outside the door. That's when my survival instinct kicked in, overriding the fear that had frozen me in place. I needed to see what it was. I had to know. Slowly, so slowly, I raised the mag light. My arm felt like it was made of lead. I lifted the beam from the floor, across the apron of the workshop, and into the darkness just beyond the half-open door. And I saw it. It was standing just at the edge of the light, maybe 30 feet away. My mind couldn't process it at first. It was like my brain just refused to accept what my eyes were telling it. It was huge, taller than any man I'd ever seen. It had to be at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It was standing on 2 legs, but they weren't human legs. They were bent backwards, like a dog's, with the powerful muscular haunches. The body was covered in thick, dark fur, matted and coarse. It looked black in the flashlight beam, but it might have been a dark brown or gray. It had broad, powerful shoulders, wider than a doorway, and long, muscular arms that hung down past its knees. The hands were wrong. They were too big, with long, thick fingers that ended in what looked like heavy, dark claws. But it was the head that broke my brain. It was the head of a wolf, or a German shepherd, a long snout, filled with teeth I could see even from that distance, yellow, prominent canines that rested on its lower lip. Pointed ears stood erect on top of its head, swiveling slightly, tracking the faint sounds of my panicked breathing. And the eyes. The flashlight beam caught them, and they glowed, a bright, burning, intelligent yellow. They weren't the dumb, reflective green of a cat or a deer. They were locked right on me, and they were filled with a terrifying, cold intelligence. It was watching me. This was the source of the silence. This was the source of the smell. This was what I had felt watching me from the tree line. We stood there for what felt like an eternity. It was probably only a few seconds. I was paralyzed. My flashlight beam was shaking violently in my hand. The creature didn't move a muscle except for its ears. It just stood there, watching me, assessing me. Its chest rose and fell with slow, deep breaths. I could see the faint mist of its breath in the cold night air. The smell was overwhelming now. It was the smell of a predator, the smell of death. I thought about the shotgun I kept in the workshop office. It was loaded with buckshot, but the office was in the back corner of the shop. To get to it, I'd have to turn my back on this thing. I knew with absolute certainty that if I turned, I would die. My mind started to work again, a frantic, panicked calculation. The house. The house was 100 yards away. The back door was unlocked. It was my only chance. The creature shifted its weight, a slight movement, but it was enough to break the spell. It took a step forward into the light, and it let out that growl again, louder this time. A deep, rumbling threat that promised violence. That's when I ran. I didn't think. I just turned and bolted. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered on the concrete, and the world was plunged into near darkness, lit only by the distant floodlight on the house. I ducked under the half-open garage door and sprinted into the night. My boots slipped on the damp grass. I could hear it behind me. It wasn't a growl anymore. It was a snarl, a horrifying, enraged sound, and I could hear its footsteps, heavy, pounding footfalls that ate up the ground between us. It was fast, unbelievably fast. I've never been more scared in my entire life. It was a primal, gut-wrenching terror, the kind of fear that bypasses your brain and just screams at your muscles to run. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just pumped my legs, my lungs burning, my eyes fixed on the yellow light of the back porch. It seemed a million miles away. I could hear its breathing now, harsh, raspy breaths. It was so close. I could feel the ground shake with its steps. I risked a glance over my shoulder. That was a mistake. It was there, a huge dark shape, loping along on those powerful, dog-like legs. It was closing the distance with terrifying speed. Its yellow eyes were glowing in the dark, fixed on me. I saw its mouth was open, its long tongue lolling out, its teeth bared in a silent snarl. I screamed. I don't think I'd ever truly screamed before in my life, but I did then. A raw, hopeless sound. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root. I went down hard, my hands and knees scraping on the cold, hard ground. The air was knocked out of me. I thought, this is it. This is how I die. I rolled over, trying to scramble to my feet, and it was almost on top of me. It towered over me, a black silhouette against the stars. I could smell its foul breath. It reached down with one of its long arms, its clawed hand outstretched. I kicked out wildly, my boot connecting with its shin. It was like kicking a telephone pole, but it made the creature grunt, a sound of surprise or annoyance. That half second of hesitation was all I needed. I scrambled up and ran again, a wild, clumsy, panic-fueled sprint. I reached the back porch steps, took them in a single leap. My hand fumbled for the doorknob. I could feel the creature's presence right behind me, a wave of heat and that awful smell. I got the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. I heard the lock click into place just as the creature hit the door. The whole house shook. The door was solid oak, a custom one I'd built myself. It bowed inward under the impact. A deep, splintering sound echoed through the small house. I scrambled away from the door, falling over a chair, and crab-walked backwards into the living room, my eyes wide with terror, fixed on the door. It hit the door again, harder this time. The wood groaned in protest. I could hear it sniffing at the crack under the door. Loud, wet, snuffling sounds. Then a scratch. The sound of claws, thick and heavy, dragging down the wood. It left deep gouges, I would see later. I was on the floor, shaking uncontrollably, my back pressed against the wall. I couldn't take my eyes off the door. I expected it to splinter and break at any second. Then the scratching stopped. Silence. The silence was almost worse than the noise. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. I heard footsteps on the wooden porch. Heavy. Walking. It was pacing back and forth, right outside my door. I could hear the creak of the floorboards under its immense weight. Then it moved around to the side of the house. I heard it brush against the siding. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the window in the living room. I peeked through a crack in the curtains I had so recently installed. It was there, standing in the yard, looking at the house. It was just outside the range of the floodlight, a massive, dark shape. It turned its head, and I saw the yellow glow of its eyes. It knew I was watching. It took a step toward the window. I let the curtain fall and backed away, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I needed a weapon. My hunting rifle was in the gun safe in my bedroom closet. I ran into the bedroom, my mind a fog of panic. I fumbled with the combination on the safe, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get it open. I pulled out my .30-06 and a box of shells. I've never been so glad to feel the cold, heavy weight of a rifle in my hands. I loaded it, my fingers clumsy, dropping a cartridge on the floor. I chambered around. The click of the bolt was the loudest, most reassuring sound I had ever heard. I moved back into the living room, rifle at the ready. I didn't know what to do. Should I shoot through the door? Through the window? I heard a noise at the back of the house again. A scraping sound. It was at the kitchen window. I crept toward the kitchen, my back against the wall, the rifle pressed tight to my shoulder. I peeked around the corner. Through the small window over the sink, I saw a shape. A dark, clawed hand was on the window pane. It was testing the lock. It was trying to get in. The intelligence of it was the most terrifying part. This wasn't a dumb animal acting on instinct. It was thinking, problem-solving. It knew I was in here. It wanted in. I raised the rifle, the window in my sights, but the hand was gone. I stood there frozen for what felt like hours. The house was silent again. I didn't move. I just stood in my kitchen, in the dark, with a high-powered rifle in my hands, listening. It circled the house for the rest of the night. I would hear it, a footstep on the gravel out front, a twig snapping in the woods behind the house, the creak of the porch steps. It was toying with me, or it was waiting. I don't know which is worse. I spent the entire night like that, moving from window to window, rifle in hand, peering out into the darkness. I never saw it clearly again. Just a shadow moving at the edge of the light, a flicker of movement in the trees. But I knew it was there. I could feel its presence, a heavy, malevolent weight pressing in on my little house. As the sky began to lighten in the east, the feeling started to fade. The first bird started to chirp, hesitantly at first, then with more confidence. The normal sounds of the morning began to return. I stood at the living room window and watched the sun come up. I have never been so grateful to see the daylight. I waited until the sun was fully above the trees before I even thought about going outside. I must have looked a mess. I hadn't slept. My clothes were torn and muddy from my fall. My face was pale and drawn. I finally got up the courage to go to the back door. I unlocked it. my hand trembling, and pulled it open. The damage was incredible. There were 4 deep, long gouges in the oak, running from top to bottom. It looked like a bear had tried to get in, but the marks were too thin, too sharp, like someone took a chisel to my door. The wood around the doorknob was splintered and cracked from the impacts. I stepped out onto the porch, and I saw the tracks. In the soft, damp earth at the bottom of the steps, there was a perfect footprint. It was huge, at least 16 inches long. It was shaped like a dog's paw, but with 5 long, distinct toes. It was a canine print, but it was the print of something that walked on 2 legs. The stride was immense. I followed the tracks. They led from the woods across the yard to where I had fallen, then to the back porch. There were more prints circling the house, deep impressions in the ground. I walked over to my workshop. The mag light was lying on the concrete floor where I'd dropped it, its beam faint in the morning light. The big roll-up door was still halfway open. There were more tracks outside the shop. I didn't go back to work that day. I went inside, locked the door, and called my brother. I was babbling. I don't even remember what I said. I just remember the words monster and wolf, and it tried to kill me. He was quiet on the other end of the line. Then he said he was coming. He showed up 3 hours later. He found me sitting in the living room, the rifle still across my lap. I showed him the door. I showed him the tracks. He looked at them for a long time. "It's a bear, man," he said, finally. "A big one. It must have been really mad." "It wasn't a bear, Mark," I said. "It walked on 2 legs. It had a wolf's head." He just looked at me with this expression of pity, like I had lost my mind. "You were tired," he said. "You were working late. You got spooked by a bear in the dark. Your mind played tricks on you." We argued. I tried to explain what I saw, the eyes, the hands, the way it moved. He wouldn't listen. He just kept saying bear. He pointed to the claw marks on the door. "See? Bear." He didn't have an explanation for the tracks. He just shrugged and said, maybe it was a weird print. He stayed the night. He thought I shouldn't be alone. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the couch, staring at the door, listening to every creak and groan of the house. The next day, Mark helped me board up the kitchen window and reinforce the back door. He thought he was helping me feel secure. He didn't understand that I would never feel secure in that house again. He left that afternoon. Before he left, he told me to sell the place. "This life isn't for you anymore," he said. "It's making you crazy." He was right about one thing. I had to leave, but it wasn't because I was crazy. It was because I knew what was in those woods, and I knew it was still out there. I couldn't stay there another night. I packed a bag, loaded my dogs into my truck, and left. I left the workshop full of tools. I left the cabinets I had just finished. I left my home. I drove to a motel in the nearest town and stayed there for a week. I called a realtor and told her to sell the property. I told her to sell everything with it, the house, the shop, the tools. I just wanted out. She asked why. I told her I was relocating for work. It was easier than telling the truth. Who would believe me? I lost a lot of money on the sale. I didn't care. No amount of money was worth spending another night in that place. I moved to a small city a few states away. I got an apartment on the 3rd floor of a big building. I have neighbors on all sides. I can hear their televisions through the walls. I can hear the traffic on the street below at all hours of the day and night. I haven't heard true silence since I left that property, and I am grateful for that every single day. The experience changed me. I don't work as a carpenter anymore. The smell of sawdust makes me anxious. I work a boring job in a warehouse, moving boxes. I'm surrounded by people all day. I don't go into the woods. I don't even like going to parks if they have too many trees. I have nightmares. I'll be running through that dark yard, the creature's hot breath on my neck. I wake up sweating, my heart pounding. I still jump at loud noises. I check the locks on my door 3 or 4 times before I go to bed. My relationship with my brother is strained. He thinks I had some kind of breakdown. He doesn't understand why I threw away the life I had built, the home I loved. We don't talk about that night anymore. It's a wall between us. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't made it to the house, if I had been a second slower, if it had caught me in the yard. I try not to think about it, but the image of that thing towering over me in the dark, its yellow eyes glowing, is burned into my memory. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was something else. Something ancient and terrible that lives in the dark, forgotten places of the world. I don't know what it's called. I've looked online, late at night when I can't sleep. I've seen the stories. Dogman, werewolf. The names don't matter. What matters is that it's real and it's out there. I'm sharing this because people need to know, especially people like me who love the quiet and the solitude of the wilderness. People who think they know the woods. You don't. There are things out there that we don't understand, things that have been there long before us and will be there long after we're gone. So, if you're ever out in the woods at night and the forest suddenly goes silent, if you smell something foul on the air, like a wet dog in a grave, if you get that feeling on the back of your neck that you are being watched by something you can't see, don't be a fool like I was. Don't try to rationalize it. Don't try to investigate. Get in your car, lock your doors, and drive away. And don't ever go back. Some places are not meant for us, and there are some things in this world that are better left undisturbed. I learned that lesson the hard way, and I was one of the lucky ones. I got away. I carry the scars, but I'm alive. I often wonder about the person who bought my property. The realtor told me it was a young couple from the city looking for a peaceful country retreat, just like I was. I hope they never have to work late in the shop. I hope they never have to walk that 100 yards in the dark. I hope they never learn what truly lives in the woods at the edge of their perfect peaceful yard. I hope they never have to meet my old neighbor, because it's still there. I know it is. It's waiting, and it remembers. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you're all doing well out there, no matter where you might be listening from, and no matter what time of day it is for you. I genuinely hope you're feeling safe and sound. The stories we're going to get into tonight are, as always, submitted by listeners. These are first-hand accounts from regular people who found themselves in situations they cannot explain. There are no easy answers here, and I'm not here to push any conclusions on you. My only job is to share their experiences as they were written and sent to me. If you have a story of your own something you've experienced that has stayed with you, I encourage you to write it down and send it in. You can find the email address in the description below. It is a safe place to share, and your anonymity will always be respected. For now, though, it's time to settle in. Go ahead and grab a drink. Lock your doors and windows. Turn down the lights. Let's begin. The first story tonight comes from a man who wishes to remain anonymous. He says this happened about 10 years ago, but that the memory of it is as clear today as it was the morning after. He writes, "My grandfather built a cabin. He didn't build it with a kit or with a contractor. He built it with his own two hands and the hands of my father and my uncle when they were teenagers. It was his escape, a small one-room structure with a loft for sleeping, tucked away on 40 acres of mountain land in western North Carolina. It wasn't fancy. It had a wood stove for heat, a propane tank for the small cooktop, and a well with a hand pump outside. For a bathroom, you used the woods or the outhouse my grandfather dug 100 feet away. It was rustic, and that was the point. When he passed away, he left the property to my father, who had little interest in it. My dad is not an outdoorsman. He appreciates a manicured lawn and a golf course, not a dense, untamed forest. For years, the cabin just sat there, visited only a couple of times a year by my dad to make sure a tree hadn't fallen on it. When I turned 25, he signed the deed over to me. He said, "You're more like him than I ever was. You'll actually use it." And he was right. I loved that place. I loved the smell of the old wood and the lingering scent of wood smoke that never quite left the blankets. I loved the silence, the kind of deep, profound quiet you can only find when you are miles away from the nearest paved road. I worked a stressful job in the city, and that cabin became my sanctuary. At least once a month, I would drive up on a Friday afternoon, spend 2 nights in near total isolation, and drive back Sunday, feeling recharged and human again. I had a routine. I'd get there before dark, unlock the heavy padlock on the door, and air the place out. I'd prime the pump and fill a few big buckets with water for washing up and drinking. Then I'd gather firewood from the stacked cords my grandfather and I had cut years before. The wood was old and perfectly seasoned. It caught fire with just a single match. By the time full dark had settled, I'd have a fire crackling in the stove, a simple meal cooking, and a deep sense of peace settling over me. I knew the woods around that cabin. I knew the sounds of deer moving through the underbrush, the hoot of the barred owls that nested nearby, the chittering of squirrels in the morning. I knew the difference between a raccoon trying to get into the trash and a bear just passing through. I was comfortable there. I felt safer in that cabin, surrounded by miles of wilderness, than I ever did walking down a city street at night. That feeling of safety was an illusion. I just didn't know it yet. This particular trip was in late October. The leaves were past their peak, but still holding on, a sea of brown and faded gold. The air had a sharp bite to it, the kind that promises a cold winter. I got to the cabin, went through my usual routine. Everything was normal. I made a fire, cooked some stew, and sat at the small wooden table my grandfather had built, just reading a book by the light of a propane lantern. The sun went down, and the world outside the windows dissolved into a perfect, inky blackness. The only light was the warm glow from the lantern and the flickering orange of the fire visible through the stove's small glass door. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the whisper of the wind in the pines, and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. It was perfect. Around 9 o'clock, I noticed something, or rather, a lack of something. The woods had gone silent. The wind had died down, which was normal enough, but the other sounds were gone too. No crickets, no rustling leaves from small animals, no distant owl calls. It was a dead, flat quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like a blanket being pressed down on the world. I've experienced this before. It usually means a predator is nearby. A coyote, a bobcat, maybe a bear. The smaller animals sense it, and they all go still and quiet, waiting for it to pass. I wasn't worried. The cabin was solid. The door was thick wood with a heavy deadbolt. I was perfectly safe. I put my book down and listened. For a long time, there was nothing, just that oppressive silence. I started to think I was imagining it, that the quiet was just a normal lull. I was about to go back to my book when I heard it, a single heavy footstep. It came from the direction of the well, maybe 30 yards from the cabin. It wasn't the sound of a deer. A deer is light on its feet, even a big buck. This was heavy. It was the sound of significant weight being put down on dry leaves and twigs. My first thought was a bear. It was the only thing that made sense. A big black bear, probably sniffing around for any food scraps I might have left out. I was always meticulous about that, so I knew it wouldn't find anything. I waited, listening for more sounds. More footsteps, a huff, the sound of it sniffing the air. But there was nothing, just that one sound and then silence again. It was unnerving. A bear would keep moving. It wouldn't just take one step and stop. I stood up and walked quietly to the window that faced the well. It was a small four-paned window, and the glass was old and slightly warped. I peered out, but it was like looking at a black wall. I couldn't see anything, not the outline of the well, not the trees, nothing. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, just listening. The silence was starting to feel personal. It felt like it was directed at the cabin, directed at me. My heart was starting to beat a little faster. This was different from other nights. The feeling in the air was wrong. The word that came to my mind was predatory. Then I smelled it. It was faint at first, just a hint on the air that managed to find its way through a crack in the window frame. It was a foul, musky smell, like a wet dog, but mixed with something else, something like rotting meat and damp earth. It was a thick, greasy smell that coated the inside of my nose. I'd smelled dead animals before. This wasn't that. This was the smell of something alive, but deeply unclean. My stomach turned. The bear theory was starting to feel less and less likely. I've been around bears. They can have a scent, a wild, animal smell, but not like this. This was foul, vile. I backed away from the window slowly. My brain was racing, trying to find a rational explanation. A sick bear? A strayed dog that had rolled in something dead? But what about the single footstep? What about the absolute total silence from every other living thing in the forest? I decided to douse the lantern. Maybe the light was attracting it. I turned the knob, and the hiss of the propane stopped. The mantle glowed bright white for a second, then faded, plunging the cabin into near total darkness. The only light was from the fire stove, a faint, pulsing red that cast dancing shadows on the walls. I felt a little better in the dark, less like I was in a fishbowl. I crept back to the window and looked out again. The darkness was still absolute, but now, without the lantern light reflecting off the glass, my eyes began to adjust. I could just start to make out the faint dark shapes of the trees against the slightly less dark sky. I scanned the area where I thought the well was. I saw nothing. No movement. No shape that didn't belong. And then I heard another sound. It was closer this time. Much closer. It was the sound of a heavy branch snapping. Not a twig. A thick, dry branch that would take a lot of force to break. It sounded like it was right at the edge of the small clearing the cabin sat in, maybe 20 feet from the front porch. My blood ran cold. Whatever was out there was big, and it was moving toward the cabin. I froze. Every muscle in my body tensed. I was barely breathing. I was listening with an intensity I didn't know I was capable of. Silence. Again, this thing, whatever it was, moved with an unnerving economy. It would make one sound, then stop. It was as if it was testing the environment, or testing me, seeing if I would react. I thought about the rifle. My grandfather had kept an old .30-30 liver-action rifle in a wooden case above the mantel. I always checked to make sure it was clean and loaded when I arrived, more out of habit and respect for him than any real fear. I had never once taken it out of its case during one of my stays. I decided against it. Getting the rifle would mean making noise. It would mean moving around the cabin. And I had a sudden, powerful conviction that the worst thing I could do right now was let the thing outside know I was aware of it. I felt like prey. I felt like a rabbit hiding in a bush, hoping the fox doesn't see it. So I just stood there, a statue in the dark, my eyes glued to the window, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't a clear sighting. It was a flicker of movement at the very edge of my vision, a patch of darkness that was darker than the other shadows. It moved from behind one of the large oak trees at the clearing's edge and stepped into the open. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. It was tall, impossibly tall. It was standing on 2 legs. It wasn't a bear. A bear can stand on 2 legs, but not like this. This thing stood upright with a natural, fluid posture. It was not a temporary stance. It was its natural way of being. My mind screamed, "Man in a suit!" but the thought died as soon as it formed. The proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, hanging down almost to its knees. The shoulders were immense, a broad, powerful line that dwarfed the head. It was just a silhouette, a hulking, vaguely man-shaped void against the slightly less black backdrop of the woods. It stood perfectly still, and I had the horrifying sense that it was looking right at the cabin, right at my window. I couldn't breathe. My lungs were frozen. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This was impossible. This couldn't be real. I was having a waking nightmare. I was overtired from work. My mind was playing tricks on me. It took a step forward. The movement was slow, deliberate. It lifted one long leg and placed it down without a sound. It moved with a predatory grace that was terrifying to behold in something so large. With that one step, it moved from the tree line to a position where the faint, flickering light from my wood stove caught a small detail. The head, it wasn't human. It was long, and it had a snout. The profile was canine, like a wolf or a huge dog, and on top of the head I could just make out the distinct, sharp points of two ears. They were tall and erect, silhouetted against the sky. The world tilted. Everything I thought I knew about the world, about the animals in the woods, about what was possible, it all shattered in that one instant. The stories you hear, the things you dismiss as folklore or campfire tales. It was real, and it was standing 20 feet from my door. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to curl up in a ball on the floor and pretend this wasn't happening. But I was paralyzed. I was pinned to the spot by a terror so pure and so absolute that it short-circuited my entire body. All I could do was watch. It took another silent step, then another. It was moving across the clearing, directly toward the front porch. The smell was stronger now, even through the closed window, that thick, greasy, wet dog and rot smell. It was making me gag. It reached the small set of 3 wooden steps that led up to the porch. It didn't use them. It simply lifted one long, powerful leg and placed its foot directly onto the porch floor, a distance of at least 3 feet straight up. The porch boards groaned under the immense weight. My grandfather had built that porch out of thick oak planks. I had seen a full-sized pickup truck accidentally back into it once, and the truck had a bigger dent than the porch did. And yet the boards creaked and groaned as if they were about to splinter. It was on the porch. It was just a few feet from the door. I could hear it now, a low, wet, snuffling sound. It was sniffing the air. Then I heard the sound of its claws, a light tick-tick-tick on the wooden floorboards as it took a step closer to the door. I finally broke my paralysis. I scrambled backward, away from the window, my feet tangling in a rug. I fell hard, my head hitting the floor with a dull thud. I lay there on my back, staring up at the dark ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of pure panic. A loud sniff came from directly outside the door, a deep, powerful inhalation of air right at the crack between the door and the frame. It was trying to scent me. It knew I was inside. Then came a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. A low growl. It wasn't the growl of a dog or a bear. It was deeper, more guttural. It vibrated through the floorboards and up into my bones. It was a sound of pure, intelligent malice. It wasn't just an animal sound. It felt like a warning. It felt like a threat. I scrambled on my hands and knees, crab-walking backward until my back hit the wall of the cabin, right next to the wood stove. I curled into a ball, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. Then a new sound, scratching, a light, exploratory scratching at the door, the sound of long, hard claws dragging slowly down the thick wood. It was testing the door, feeling it. I could picture those long arms, the claws at the end of those inhuman hands. The scratching stopped. There was a moment of silence. I held my breath. Thump! A hard, solid impact against the center of the door. It sounded like someone had hit it with a sledgehammer. The whole cabin shuddered. The deadbolt held. Thank God for that deadbolt. My grandfather had installed it after a story he'd heard about a bear breaking into a neighbor's cabin. It was a heavy, industrial-grade lock. Thump! Thump! 2 more hits in rapid succession. Harder this time. The door frame groaned. I could hear the wood splintering. It was trying to break the door down. I finally found my voice. A pathetic, strangled whimper escaped my lips. The instant I made the sound, The pounding stopped. Silence. I clamped my hand over my mouth, my eyes wide with terror. It had heard me. It knew for certain I was in here, and it knew I was afraid. I could hear it breathing, a deep, raspy sound, like air being pulled through a wet sieve. It was right on the other side of the door. I could almost feel the heat of its body through the wood. I stayed like that, curled in a ball, hand over my mouth, for what felt like an eternity. I was too scared to move, too scared to even breathe too loudly. I just listened to the sound of that thing's respiration, just inches away from me. After a minute that stretched into an hour, the breathing sound moved. I heard the tick-tick-tick of its claws on the porch again. It was moving toward the window I had been looking out of. I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want it to see me. A heavy thud against the wall next to the window, then a scraping sound. It was leaning against the cabin. I heard a loud sniff right at the window pane. I waited for the glass to break. I waited for that long-snouted head to come smashing through, for those claws to reach in for me. I was completely, utterly helpless. But the glass didn't break. After a few moments, the sniffing stopped. I heard the porch boards creak again as the weight shifted off the wall. I heard the single, heavy thud as it stepped off the porch and back onto the ground. I risked opening my eyes. Just a crack. I was still huddled by the stove. I couldn't see the window from my position. I listened. I heard nothing. No footsteps. No breathing. The silence of the woods had returned, but it was different now. It was just an empty silence. The heavy, predatory feeling was gone. I didn't move. I stayed in that ball for hours. I watched the faint red glow of the fire in the stove slowly die down until the cabin was in absolute, total blackness. I didn't sleep. I didn't even doze. I just sat there, shaking, listening. The first hint of dawn was a faint gray light that started to outline the window frame. It was the most beautiful sight I have ever seen. As the light grew, so did a tiny sliver of courage. When the sun was fully up, casting long shadows through the trees, I finally uncurled myself. My body was stiff and sore. I crept to the window and peered out. Nothing. The clearing was empty. The woods looked just as they always had. It was as if nothing had happened. For a crazy second, I thought maybe I had dreamed it all, a vivid, terrifying nightmare. Then I looked at the door. There were 3 deep circular dents in the wood, right at the center, and running from the top of the door to the bottom were long, deep scratches, gouged into the oak. Splinters of wood littered the porch floor. It was real. I didn't pack. I didn't gather my things. I grabbed my keys and my wallet from the table, unlocked the deadbolt, and wrenched the door open. I didn't look at the damage. I ran out of the cabin, down the porch steps, and sprinted to my truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands still shaking. I got the door open, threw myself inside, and locked it. I jammed the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I didn't even bother turning around. I just threw it in drive and stomped on the gas, tearing across the small clearing and onto the dirt track that led away from the cabin. I didn't slow down until my tires hit paved road 5 miles away. I drove for an hour, the sun fully in the sky, before I finally pulled over to the side of the road and just sobbed. I cried until I couldn't cry anymore. I've never been back to the cabin. I put the property up for sale a month later and sold it for a loss to a timber company. I didn't care. I just wanted it gone. I don't know what I saw that night. I'm not going to try and give it a name, but I know it was not a bear. I know it was not a man. It was something else. Something ancient and intelligent and predatory, and it knows we are in its woods. I don't go camping anymore. I don't even like being in my own backyard after dark. That night broke something in me. It shattered my sense of safety, my understanding of the world. Sometimes, when it's very quiet, I can still hear that low, guttural growl, and I can still smell that awful, greasy stench. I know it's just my memory, but it feels as real as it did that night. I just wanted to tell someone who might actually believe me. The second account this evening is from a woman named Chloe. She details an experience from her late teens, one that changed her perception of the familiar roads she called home. She says, I grew up in a very rural part of Virginia, not the suburbs that pretend to be country, but real, deep country. Our nearest neighbor was a mile away. The road to our house was a two-lane blacktop that wound through miles of dense forest and farmland. At night, there were no street lights. The only light came from your own headlights, cutting a tunnel through an otherwise absolute darkness. I learned to drive on those roads. By the time I was 17, I could navigate them with my eyes closed. I knew every curve, every dip, every place a deer was likely to jump out. Driving home at night was second nature to me. It was never scary. It was peaceful. This happened on a Tuesday night in November. I was a senior in high school, and I worked a part-time job at a diner in the closest town, which was about a 20-minute drive away. I usually got off at 10, so I was used to driving home in the dark. It was a clear, cold night. The stars were brilliant. I had my window cracked just enough to let the crisp air in, and I was listening to music on the radio. It was a completely normal drive home. I was about 5 miles from my house on a long, straight stretch of road bordered on both sides by thick, dark woods. The trees grew right up to the shoulder. I was probably going about 50 miles per hour, maybe a little more. My headlights were on bright, illuminating the road far ahead. Suddenly, there was a loud, solid whump on the passenger side of my car. It was so loud and so sudden that I screamed. My whole car shuddered from the impact. My first and only thought was, deer. It had to be. One had run out of the woods and I'd clipped it. I'd seen it happen a dozen times to other people. My heart was pounding. I immediately hit the brakes, my tires screeching on the pavement. The car came to a stop about 100 feet past the point of impact. I sat there for a second, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my breathing. My music was still playing, sounding tinny and out of place. I turned it off. The silence that rushed in was absolute. I knew I had to check on the deer. If it was injured, I couldn't just leave it on the side of the road, and I had to check the damage to my car. It was my parents' old sedan, and I knew my dad would be furious if it was badly damaged. This was a mistake. I know that now. Looking back, every horror movie trope in the book was flashing like a neon sign. But at that moment, I was just a 17-year-old kid who thought she'd hit a deer. I put the car in park and turned on my hazard lights. The rhythmic flashing cast an eerie orange glow on the trees. I took a deep breath, grabbed the big Maglite flashlight my dad insisted I keep in the car, and opened my door. The cold air hit me like a slap. It was colder than I thought. I shut the door behind me and stood for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. My car's hazard lights were pulsing, and my headlights were still on, pointing down the empty road. I turned and pointed the heavy flashlight back the way I had come, sweeping the beam along the shoulder of the road. I was looking for a brown, furry body, a deer, but I saw nothing. The shoulder was empty. The ditch beside it was empty. There was no sign of an animal at all. That was strange. The impact had been hard. Surely it would have been thrown into the ditch. I walked slowly back toward the spot where I thought I'd hit it, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky circle on the asphalt and the dead leaves on the shoulder. As I walked, I became aware of two things. First, the woods were completely silent. No crickets, no rustling. Just like in the first story, it was a dead, unnatural quiet that I had never experienced on this road before. The second thing was a smell. It was faint, but it was there, a thick, unpleasant odor, like spoiled meat and wet fur. I wrinkled my nose. I figured if I had hit a deer, maybe that was just the smell of its blood or guts. It was gross, but it made sense. I got to the spot where I estimated the impact happened, and I still saw nothing. No deer, no blood on the road, nothing. I was starting to get confused. Could I have imagined it? No, the sound was too loud, the jolt too real. I decided to check my car. I walked back and ran the flashlight beam along the passenger side, and my stomach dropped. There was a massive dent in the rear passenger door. It was a deep, concave dent, right in the middle of the door panel, as if someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. And above the dent, near the window, were 4 long, parallel scratches, deep enough to have gone right through the paint to the metal underneath. I stared at it, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. A deer couldn't have done that. The dent was too high up and too concentrated. And the scratches, they looked like claw marks, but they were too far apart and too deep for any animal I knew of. A bear, maybe? But a bear would have had to be standing on its hind legs to make marks that high. And we didn't have a lot of bears in this specific area. The foul smell was stronger here, right by the car. It clung to the metal. A feeling of profound unease began to creep over me. The silence, the smell, the impossible damage to my car. Something was very, very wrong. The feeling of being alone on that dark road suddenly shifted from peaceful to terrifying. I felt exposed, watched. I swept the flashlight beam into the woods on the passenger side of the road, the direction the deer would have come from. The beam cut through the first layer of trees and tangled brush. I saw nothing but trunks and shadows. I kept the light moving, panning it slowly back and forth. And then the beam caught something. 2 points of light reflecting back at me from deep within the trees. Eyeshine. My first thought was relief. It was the deer. It must have run into the woods after I hit it. But the relief lasted only a second. The eyes were too high off the ground. A deer's eyes would be maybe 3-4 feet up. These were higher, much higher. I was holding the flashlight at my own eye level, and the reflection was coming from a point that seemed to be level with my own head, or even slightly above. I'm 5'6". My hand holding the flashlight started to tremble. The eyes were a pale greenish yellow, and they were steady. they weren't blinking. They were just fixed on me, and they were too far apart to be a deer. My brain scrambled for an explanation. A hunter in a tree stand? But it was the middle of the night on a Tuesday, and why would they just be staring at me? A large owl? No, the eyes were too big, too far apart. I took a hesitant step backward toward my driver's side door. I did not take the flashlight off the eyes. I was too scared to. As I moved, the thing in the woods moved too. It wasn't a fast movement. It was a slow, deliberate shift. The 2 points of light rose another foot, maybe 2 feet, into the air. It was standing up. It had been crouching or squatting, and now it was rising to its full height. A wave of pure primal terror washed over me. I have never, before or since, felt a fear so absolute. It was a physical thing, a cold weight that settled in my gut and spread through my limbs, making them feel heavy and useless. The shape behind the eyes began to resolve itself, pulling away from the deeper shadows of the forest. It was huge. It was a massive, dark silhouette, now standing fully upright on 2 legs. It was taller than any man I had ever seen. The top of its head was obscured by a low-hanging branch, but I could see its shoulders. They were incredibly broad, like a bodybuilder's, but wider. It took a step forward, out of the deepest shadows, and into a small patch of relative clearing between 2 trees. My flashlight beam now illuminated more of it. The body was covered in what looked like dark, matted fur. Its arms were long, shockingly long, ending in hands that seemed too big, with fingers that looked like claws. But it was the head that made my mind completely shut down. It had a long, canine snout, like a wolf. I could see the shape of it clearly, and on top of its head I could see pointed ears, erect and alert. It was a monster from a nightmare. It was a werewolf. That was the only word my terrified brain could produce. It stood there, partially illuminated, just looking at me. It wasn't growling or making any aggressive moves. It was just watching me with those cold, intelligent, yellow-green eyes. The stillness was somehow more terrifying than a charge would have been. It was assessing me. I finally found my feet. I turned and scrambled for my car door, my fingers fumbling with the handle. The sound of the latch clicking open was the loudest sound in the world. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and hit the lock button. I hit it 3 times, as if that would make it any safer. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely get the key back into the ignition. It took me 2 tries. The engine turned over, and I have never been so grateful to hear that sound. The moment the engine roared, the thing in the woods reacted. It let out a sound that was half roar, half scream. It was a sound of fury, a terrifying, guttural blast of noise that hit my car like a physical force. In the same instant, it charged out of the woods. It moved with an impossible speed. It covered the 20 feet from the tree line to my car in what felt like a single bound. It was a blur of dark fur and long limbs. It slammed its body into the passenger side of the car, right where the dent already was. The whole car rocked violently on its suspension. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound. I could see it through the passenger window. Its face was right there, just inches of glass separating us. The face was nightmarish. The snout was long and black, the lips pulled back in a snarl to reveal huge yellow teeth. The teeth of a wolf, but bigger. Its eyes were burning with a cold, hateful intelligence. It was not a dumb animal. It knew what I was. It knew what this car was. And it was furious. I stomped on the gas pedal. The tires spun on the asphalt for a terrifying second. Then they caught. The car lurched forward. As I pulled away, the creature slammed a hand, a huge five-fingered hand with what looked like black claws, onto the roof of the car. I heard the metal screech and buckle under the force. It tried to hold on. I kept my foot pressed to the floor. The car fishtailed, but I managed to get it straight. The speedometer climbed, 40, 50, 60. The hand scraped along the roof for a few feet, the sound of claws on metal setting my teeth on edge, and then it was gone. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I stared straight ahead, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes wide. I drove the last 5 miles to my house faster than I have ever driven in my life. I didn't slow down for the curves. It's a miracle I didn't crash. When I saw the lights of my house, I started sobbing with relief. I pulled into the driveway, leaving a trail of gravel, and didn't even bother to park properly. I just slammed it into park, killed the engine, and ran. I ran for the front door, unlocked it, and threw myself inside, slamming it and locking it behind me. My parents came running, woken by the noise. They saw the state I was in, sobbing, shaking, unable to speak coherently, and immediately thought I'd been in a car accident. It took me a long time to calm down enough to tell them what happened. I told them everything. I told them I thought I hit a deer, about the silence, the smell, the impossible dent, the eyes in the woods, the thing that charged me. My dad listened patiently. When I was done, he put a hand on my shoulder. He told me I'd probably hit a big buck or maybe a bear. He said it must have stunned me, and my mind had played tricks on me in the dark. He said I was in shock. He said the damage to the car looked bad, but that an animal could do strange things in a panic. He didn't believe me. Not really. My mom just kept saying I was safe now. That's all that mattered. The next morning, my dad went out to look at the car in the daylight. The big dent was there. The long scratches were there. And on the roof, there were 5 more deep gouges in the metal, starting from the passenger side and dragging back for about 3 feet. He stood there looking at it for a long time. He never said he believed me, but he also never mentioned the bear theory again. He just quietly called the insurance company and told them I'd hit a deer. It was easier. I never drove down that road at night again. For the rest of the time I lived at home, I took the long way, an extra 15 minutes, just to avoid it. Even in the daytime, driving past that stretch of woods made my skin crawl. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was real. It was tall, it stood on 2 legs, and it had the head of a wolf. It was intelligent, and it was malevolent. I don't know why it was there or why it attacked my car. Maybe I startled it. Maybe I invaded its territory. Maybe it just saw an opportunity. I'm in my 30s now. I live in a city. I don't think I could ever live in the country again. I need streetlights. I need the sounds of traffic and other people. I can't stand that deep rural silence anymore, because I know what can be hiding in it. Our final story tonight comes from a man named Mark, who shares an experience from a hunting trip with his cousin. He asks that we only use his first name. He writes, "My cousin, David, and I grew up hunting and fishing together. Our dads taught us from the time we were old enough to walk quietly and hold a rifle steady. We were at home in the woods. We knew the land, we knew the animals, and we respected both. We were not the kind of guys to get spooked by shadows or jump at the sound of a twig snapping. We were seasoned, we were competent, and we were comfortable in places that would make most people deeply uneasy. This happened about 15 years ago. I was in my early 20s. David was a year older. We had planned a week-long deer hunting trip in a large national forest in the Pacific Northwest. This wasn't a place with campgrounds and marked trails. This was deep backcountry. We drove my old pickup truck as far as the logging roads would go, then parked it and hiked in another 5 miles to a spot we liked near a ridge. We set up a simple, effective camp, a 2-man tent, a fire pit, and our gear stored securely. The first 2 days were perfect. The weather was cool and clear. We saw plenty of animal signs, and the woods were alive with the normal sounds of the forest. We were in our element. We were happy. The third day is when things started to get strange. We were out at dawn, moving slowly and quietly along a game trail, heading toward a clearing where deer often came to graze in the morning. David was about 20 yards ahead of me. He suddenly stopped and held up a hand. I froze, thinking he'd spotted a buck. I raised my rifle slightly and scanned the woods ahead. But he wasn't looking up. He was looking down at the ground. He motioned for me to come forward, but to do it quietly. I eased up next to him. "What is it?" I whispered. He just pointed at the ground. In a patch of damp earth on the trail, there was a footprint. It was a massive print. It was shaped vaguely like a canine track, with 4 distinct toe pads and claw marks, but the size was all wrong. It was huge, easily twice the size of the largest wolf track I had ever seen. And wolves were not even supposed to be common in this particular part of the forest. But the really strange part was the way it was pressed into the ground. It was deep, incredibly deep. Whatever made this track was carrying an immense amount of weight, far more than any wolf. "Bear?" I whispered, but I knew it wasn't. The shape was completely wrong. A bear track is flat-footed, almost human-like in a way. This was clearly a canid print, with the pads arranged in an arch. David just shook his head slowly, his eyes wide. "I don't know what that is," he breathed. We looked around and found another one a few feet away. And then we realized something else that made the hair on my arm stand up. There were only 2 prints, and they were in a straight line, one behind the other, with a stride of about 5 feet. It was walking on 2 legs. The implications of that didn't fully sink in. Our brains just couldn't accept it. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was 2 overlapping prints. Maybe it was a weird washout from a recent rain. But the prints were too clear, too perfect. A deep sense of unease settled over us. The woods, which had felt like home just minutes before, suddenly felt alien and hostile. We were both thinking the same thing, the old stories you hear from other hunters, the hushed tales of strange things seen in the deep woods. We had always dismissed them, but looking at that impossible track, dismissal was no longer an option. We decided to abandon the hunt for the morning and head back to camp. We tried to act normal, but the spell was broken. We were constantly looking over our shoulders. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. We spent the rest of the day close to camp, not straying far. We kept the fire going, even though it was still daylight. The presence of the flames was a comfort. We didn't talk about the track. It was like if we didn't acknowledge it, it might not be real. As dusk began to settle, the feeling of being watched intensified. It was a tangible thing, a pressure on the back of my neck. David felt it too. I could see it in his eyes. He kept glancing nervously into the darkening woods that surrounded our small clearing. "I don't like this, man," he said, his voice low. "Something feels wrong." I agreed. The air was thick with a kind of predatory tension. We decided to pack up our essential gear and hike out in the morning, first thing. We weren't going to spend another night out here. As the last of the light faded from the sky, the woods went completely silent, just like the other stories have described. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. All the birds, all the insects, all the small background noises of the forest just stopped. We were sitting by the fire, our rifles across our laps. We weren't pretending anymore. We were scared. That's when we heard it. It came from the direction of the ridge, maybe a half-mile away. It was a howl, but it was not the howl of a wolf or a coyote. I have heard both many times. This was different. It started low, almost a moan, then rose in pitch and volume until it was a piercing, mournful cry that echoed through the valleys. And at the end of it, there was something else, a sound that was almost like a twisted, guttural laugh. It was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard. It was not an animal sound. It was intelligent. It was mocking. David and I looked at each other across the fire, our faces pale in the flickering light. Neither of us said a word. We didn't have to. We both knew that sound was connected to the tracks we had found. We grabbed our packs and our rifles. The plan to wait until morning was gone. We were leaving. Now. "Leave the tent," I said. "Just take what we need." We moved quickly, stuffing our sleeping bags and a few supplies into our packs. We doused the fire, plunging our camp into darkness. We had our headlamps, but we were reluctant to turn them on. We didn't want to announce our position. We started walking, heading back down the trail we had come in on. We were moving as fast as we could without running, trying to be quiet, but it was impossible in the dark. Every step crunched on dry leaves and snapped twigs. We had gone maybe a quarter of a mile when David, who was in front, stopped dead. He grabbed my arm. "Listen," he whispered. I strained my ears. At first I heard nothing but my own frantic heartbeat. Then I heard it. Something was moving through the woods to our left, parallel to the trail. It was heavy. We could hear it breaking branches as it moved. But it was moving with a speed that didn't seem possible for something so large in such dense terrain. And it was silent. Other than the branches it was breaking, it was making no sound. No footsteps, no heavy breathing, just a powerful, silent presence pacing us in the darkness. We started moving faster. It was no longer a fast walk. We were jogging, half stumbling down the trail in the pitch black. The sound of the thing in the woods kept pace with us effortlessly. We knew it was toying with us. It could have overtaken us at any moment. It was letting us know it was there. It was enjoying our fear. We finally broke out of the thickest part of the woods and into a section where a logging company had clear-cut years before. It was an open area, dotted with stumps and new growth, all bathed in the pale, cold light of the moon. The trail cut straight across it. For the first time, we could see for more than a few feet around us. We stopped for a second to catch our breath, our eyes scanning the tree line we had just come from. And there it was. It was standing at the edge of the woods, partially obscured by a young pine tree. It was just a silhouette against the darkness of the forest behind it. But it was enough. It was a giant. It had to be 8, maybe 9 feet tall. It was standing on 2 legs, perfectly balanced. The shape was unmistakable. Broad, powerful shoulders, long, muscular arms, and the head. The head was canine. A long snout and pointed ears were clearly visible against the moonlight. It was just standing there, watching us. It wasn't moving. It wasn't making a sound. It was like a statue carved from shadow. David made a small, choked sound. I raised my rifle, my hands shaking. The crosshairs wavered, but I centered them on the creature's chest. "Don't," David whispered, his voice tight with fear. "Don't shoot. Let's just go." He was right. I had the terrifying certainty that shooting it would be the worst possible thing we could do. It would either have no effect or it would enrage it. And we were 5 miles from our truck, out in the open. We stood no chance. Slowly, I lowered my rifle. We started backing away, never taking our eyes off the figure at the edge of the woods. It didn't move. It just watched us. We backed away for 100 yards, and then we turned and we ran. We ran as we had never run before. We sprinted across the clear cut, our lungs burning, our legs screaming. We didn't look back. We were too afraid of what we might see. We plunged back into the dark woods on the other side of the clearing and kept running, guided only by the faint outline of the trail. We fell, we got up, we kept going. Adrenaline and pure terror fueled us. The rest of the hike to the truck is a blur. I just remember the desperate, all-consuming need to get to safety. We didn't hear anything behind us, but the feeling of being pursued never left. When we finally saw the familiar shape of my old pickup truck, parked at the end of the dirt road, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. We practically threw our packs and rifles in the bed, jumped in the cab, and locked the doors. I fumbled the key into the ignition. The engine turned over. I slammed the truck into gear, spun the tires in the dirt, and we shot down that logging road, bouncing and sliding, not caring about the suspension or anything else. We didn't speak a word. We just drove. We drove until we hit the main highway, and then we drove some more. We didn't stop until we reached a brightly lit, 24-hour gas station an hour away. We sat in the truck for a long time, under the fluorescent lights of the gas station canopy, the engine still running. We were both pale and shaking. "What was that?" I finally asked, my voice hoarse. David just stared straight ahead, out the windshield. "I don't know," he said, "and I don't ever want to know." And that was the last time we ever spoke about it. We drove home. We told our families we got spooked by a bear and decided to cut the trip short. It was a lie, but it was the only explanation we could give. How do you tell someone you were stalked by a 9-foot-tall wolf man? They would think you were crazy or lying. The aftermath was almost as strange as the event itself. David changed. He sold all of his hunting gear. He stopped going fishing. He refused to even go on a simple hike. If I ever tried to bring up that night, he would shut down completely. He'd get angry. He'd say, We didn't see anything. We just got spooked. Drop it. It destroyed our friendship. The one person in the world who knew what I went through, who saw what I saw, refused to acknowledge it. He chose to bury it, to pretend it never happened. I think for him, the reality of it was just too much to handle. It broke his world, and he couldn't live in the pieces. I didn't stop hunting, but I never went back to that forest. I stick to places that are more populated now. I never hunt alone, and I am never, ever in the woods after dark. That feeling of comfort and belonging I once had is gone forever. Now, when I'm in the woods, I always feel like I'm a guest in someone else's house, someone who doesn't like visitors. I still have nightmares about it. I see that towering silhouette at the edge of the trees, watching us. I hear that awful, intelligent howl. I know what's out there in the deep, dark places of the world, and I know that we are not at the top of the food chain, not everywhere. And on that somber note, we've come to the end of our time together for tonight. A genuine and heartfelt thank you to the people who wrote in and allowed me to share their experiences. To trust a stranger with a story so personal, so terrifying, takes a tremendous amount of courage, and I am truly grateful. You are not alone in what you went through, and thank you to every single one of you for listening, for taking the time to tune in and be a part of this community. If you enjoyed your time here, or if these stories resonated with you, please consider liking the video and sharing it with someone who might also appreciate it. And if you haven't already, subscribing to the channel is the best way to ensure you don't miss what's next. I always take the time to read through the comments. I'm consistently impressed by the respectful and insightful conversations that happen down there. It's a testament to the quality of this community. So please feel free to share your own thoughts on what you've heard tonight. Until we meet again, please take care of yourselves and take care of each other. The world can be a frightening place, and a little kindness goes a long way. Watch over your loved ones. Keep your head on a swivel. And, as always, stay safe out there. Good night.